What is the best way to make sure the entire world population will fight in your army? An army that will be like the sands of the seas as it's described in Revelation 20. We all know it can't last, the trajectory we are currently traveling as a species, socially, economically, or spiritually. I don't believe we are quite at the end of the little season, but we are definitely entering the final act. And those in control have generously offered up their guide for it, with their actions in the present and their words and legislation for the future. They are stealing our humanity now in order to usher in AI, smart cities, and complete and total oppression in just a few short years. We are on the verge of complete and total economic collapse. Asset prices are through the roof while jobs are nowhere to be found and worsening by the day. The worst possible combination for 99% of the population. My second video on banking and finance goes into much more detail on the topic, so feel free to watch that one for supplemental information. It's no surprise to anyone to say that government has completely let us down in recent decades. Gone are the days of propping up the middle class and making sacrifices to ensure that future generations flourish. Quite the opposite. Those in control could not make it any more clear that we are nearing the end of an empire, and they're milking it for everything it's worth, creating a wealth gap that will certainly outpace Venezuela soon. The famous quote, "The last official act of any government is to loot the treasury," describes our current economic situation perfectly. America, as well as most of Europe, has been known for their strong middle class for several generations. That is now a thing of the past due to the nationalization of all assets. And while these policies have benefited an entire generation, the boomers, they have ensured poverty for subsequent generations, and it gets worse with each one. Borrowing from future generations not to ensure survival, but to make themselves filthy, stinking rich is egregious. There were opportunities after the great financial crisis of 2009 to allow fraudulent and negligent corporations and financial centers to collapse organically. But in a surprising twist, they were bailed out, and still are to this day. By all metrics, we've been in a massive recession since then, but they just print unprecedented amounts of money to skew the data. The problem with this is twofold. First, the path printed money takes is directly into the pockets of billionaires. And second, this money is not inflated until the scraps trickle down to us. This is called the Cantillon effect, which means that in addition to wages not keeping up with inflation, the billionaires who are given all of this money without doing any work get to spend it at a much higher valuation, further increasing the wealth gap. The problem is this financial plan of printing money into oblivion can't last. In addition, they use many other government and financial tools to artificially prop up asset prices so that future generations will never be able to afford to purchase houses, stocks, and various other financial products necessary to obtain generational wealth. There is only one reason why any government would deliberately sabotage the future and ultimately themselves like this. And it's because they know it's over. And before it all collapses, they want to convert as much of this worthless fiat into tangible assets so that the rest of us won't own anything. In the last few years, they've been doing this under the guise of private equity, now buying up massive tracts of land, entire neighborhoods, even utilities. Older generations who inherited their parents' land love selling it to private equity instead of passing it on to their children, which would go a long way towards getting us out of this mess. Increasing the wealth gap has been shown to cause significant devastation on populations, including irreversible poverty and illness. Going back as recently as the early 70s, minimum wage was equivalent to $65 or $70 an hour today in most states, meaning that two people working 40 hours a week at the lowest wages could afford to buy a home. Today, those same two people could barely afford rent. And to be honest, it wasn't all that great back then either, because the father did not intend for us to be debt slaves for 30 years. Which is why he opposed interest-bearing loans, all to live in a meager home just to have some chance of acquiring a tiny amount of wealth to pass on to our children before we die. Well, they've upped it again, and now buying a median-priced home is nearly impossible for younger generations due to asset manipulation. The free market is gone, and the government is working with the Fed and private equity to make sure most young people are renters for life. Fannie and Freddie have been bailing out 7 million mortgage holders since 2020, and another 8 million have avoided foreclosure due to the mortgage forgiveness due to the weakening job market, just to prevent housing prices dropping and younger generations being able to afford them. In addition, the Fed holds all mortgage-backed securities and will never sell, so housing prices won't collapse and will certainly not return to affordable levels before the end. especially with the other tricks they have up their sleeves in the way of pending legislation, which I'll talk about later in this video. A lot of people think it would be economically devastating if there was a housing crash, but that couldn't be further from the truth. You may receive less for the house you're selling, but you'd also be paying less for the next house you're buying. It's a wash. The only reason to keep prices artificially propped up is to ensure younger generations are perpetual renters, which is necessary to carry out their plans for complete totalitarianism. And it gets worse. Our own government is now socializing losses and privatizing profits. It's quite clear that those in power, those who serve in the synagogue of Satan, are greedy. But it's not just that they want our money and possessions. They want complete control of us physically and spiritually as well, as they will need us for the final battle. Luckily, we already know it won't be enough, but millions will suffer in its wake. Also covered in my second video on banking and finance is equities, commodities, and really any asset you might be interested in investing in. They too are artificially inflated to make sure younger generations, the generations they need to have total control of in the end, cannot ever experience generational wealth. Some people say that younger generations will inherit the wealth after the boomers pass on, but there's two problems with that theory. One, according to many surveys and interviews with financial planners, they plan to spend most of it in their twilight years. And two, there is legislation pending in the name of green energy that will make home ownership expenses outright impossible for all but the super rich. The end of generational wealth has already begun. Millennials and especially Gen Z are experiencing it right now. They are the most educated and least employed generation to date. So they get to see firsthand how it's impossible to stay ahead of debt and inflation that outpaces wages in the modern world. Even the ones who have a job that matches their education aren't paid enough to be considered middle class by boomer standards. They are awake. They know that they have no chance of ever retiring if they just play it safe like previous generations did. So what do? They gamble like degenerates. They invest in crypto ETFs with 100x leverage in hopes of maybe someday being able to afford a home, support a family, or retire. To those of us who aren't living paycheck to paycheck, it seems ridiculous and irresponsible. But they know poverty is the only reality for playing it safe. Excessive risk really is their only chance, and on margin to boot. However, this can lead to devastating losses as we just saw 3 weeks ago. A flash crash in the crypto market caused some of these kids to lose everything. Rags to riches to rags again. They went from despair to hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars, then right back to nothing. Nearly 3,000 kids in their 20s killed themselves that night. We are witnessing the financial collapse of the future right before our eyes, and guess what? The government, media, and financial institutions keep pumping asset prices to oblivion while creating hyperinflation that the other 99% of the population will suffer, and no one questions it. The other evidence of end times is much more clear. I don't think I need to tell anyone that we have a complete moral breakdown of society. Reminds me of an even worse version of the Weimar Republic before the Nazis took over. Drugs, prostitution, divorce, sexual perversion, bodily mutilation, civil unrest, and runaway inflation. And what always follows complete moral breakdown? Societal collapse. It's the end of the American dream and the beginning of you will own nothing and be happy. But what we're approaching is not the next world war, it's the Bolshevik Revolution. It's going to be the end of life on Earth for hundreds of millions of Christians. The direction the world has been heading only has one conclusion, and it's exactly what we've been told for years. All nations combined into essentially a one-world government with the goal of complete control of all life. It's not hard to find. They tell us what they're doing. The WEF and the UN have released detailed plans for global domination, as they put it. The groundwork is complete. They have already made us slaves by the biblical definition. They already control the 5 institutions that allow them to manipulate the worldwide population: government, banking, media, education, and medicine. They have most people under their spell. We have been tricked into believing that we have political power through voting, but the two-party system ensures one of their own will always win every election. We think we have a legitimate financial system despite every dollar printed being tied to debt that we have to pay to a private bank in the form of income tax. It's preposterous. Most believe media and education is reputable and that pharmaceuticals are legitimate medicine. It's true, the vast majority of the population has been completely deceived and will follow their satanic overlords to their graves. But they don't have all of us, not quite yet. What they do have is a plan that they began implementing years ago and is now on the verge of maturing. Complete and total control of all mankind. The WEF and UN have been pumping Agenda 2030 for years, just an evolved version of Agenda 21, but now we've moved on from discussion to implementation. Let's start with biometric IDs. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the WEF, says that we need to have a fusion of our biological and our digital identities. Sounds like a mouthful, but what that means is that they are introducing a way to connect our social and medical lives with our ability to eat, go to the store, use the internet, earn an income, live. It's directly related to CBDCs, social credit scores, and it requires complete allegiance just to exist. Participation is not optional. Looks like you didn't get your 15th long metal spike filled with poison injected into your bloodstream last week, so your finances have been blocked. Complete and total surveillance in everything we do, tracking our carbon footprint, our political and religious opinions, everything we buy. The list is endless. Don't think Trump is going to save us either. Real ID began under his administration, and we now have to have one just to fly in a plane. The next step is full implementation of biometric digital ID, which is happening now in the UK, Australia, and Switzerland, among others. We've already seen what happens to people who spread the truth, or as they like to call it, misinformation. Jobs are disappearing already, and most of the rest will soon be replaced with AI. They are forcing us to become completely helpless so that we have no choice but to become completely reliant on them just for basic survival. Then they will change the narrative. This is where the happy part of "you will own nothing and be happy" comes in, and how they're going to easily be able to convert us all to the new system. I've covered fake jobs in previous videos and show that they have been replacing real workers with these fake jobs for several decades now. Almost all government, administrative, and corporate jobs are worthless. Those people don't actually do anything. We are becoming desensitized to doing nothing of import and accepting a paycheck for it. Whether or not real AI or AGI ever comes to fruition is irrelevant. You can read through the UN and WEF material to see they've already accepted it as the future of employment and governance. They will tell us that because of this amazing technology, we will now only have to work 20 hours a week, 30 weeks a year because AI is so amazing. It's an easy sell. But the truth is those people never worked at all anyway. So they will be happy to keep receiving the same paycheck for a fraction of the hours of unnecessarily sitting at a desk. But only those people will be happy. The same ignorant slaves to the system we have today. The rest of us will have daily choices like speak the truth or eat. Dissenters will be dealt with. Don't believe me? There's a pact that now all 193 countries that participate in the United Nations has signed. What I have here isn't even the original, which was far more disturbing, but has since been removed from their website after people started reposting it everywhere. It's been wiped off social media, and when you go to the original link, here's all you see. But even the one you can still get off the site tells you what they're up to. If you read through the UN's Pact for the Future, the first thing you'll notice is the use of the word global, over and over again, especially referring to enforcement. And with all countries signing, they have it. Global to me sounds like all nations, Gog and Magog. But here's the kicker. They want it all run by AI. Trump is even promoting AI government and has already taken steps to begin the transition. Good luck leaving your 200 square foot apartment in the smart city to try to go on a wilderness walk on property owned by the collective, which by that time it all will be. Of course, AI will also replace many jobs, leaving us without bargaining chips for our basic human rights, and we will be forced to accept their UBI just to survive. But at what cost? They want to control all means of commerce by increasing the amount of central bank influence worldwide. As we all know, those who print the money control everything. But they're taking it a step further with digital currency, which will take away the ability for us to conduct private business. Every transaction will be recorded and graded under our social credit scores. And if they don't like something they see in our medical scans, our political or theological beliefs, something we bought, they can cut off access to our bank accounts in an instant. Housing may already seem out of reach for most of the younger generations today, but it's going to get much worse. The European Union has begun sending out letters to citizens stating that they will have to make significant upgrades in order to adhere to new green energy standards. Homes will need to be zero emissions in the near future. It's called the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Just like with everything else, when government gets power, they just lever that into further oppression. So already you have people expected to pay over €100,000 to adhere to these new standards. Now, picture America, where, let's be honest, most neighborhood homes built in the last 30 years will essentially be teardowns because of our pathetic building codes. They leak so much heat and air conditioning and are made of such leaky, toxic materials that it will cost as much as the house itself to fix, which ultimately won't be worth it. If tiny little, well-insulated European homes are $100,000 to fix now, imagine ours here in America. Now imagine it when the next level of governance appears. In addition, they have already made significant headway into securing natural resources. Private equity is buying up utilities and farmland. How is that even possible? Our government allows private equity to buy utilities. Resources necessary for survival, just like housing, are now going to be priced out of the reach of most people. Other billionaires are buying land with water rights that can devastate their entire region, as we're seeing right now in the West. And then you have the AI scam. The stock market has priced in 90% of the world's GDP going to AI. And as of now, the pinnacle of its accomplishments are just some funny TikToks. It's an excuse to build massive data centers, potentially for AI use, but certainly to manage the massive amount of data the biometric IDs will require. And another benefit for them, the ridiculous amount of natural resources that they demand, like electricity and water. At this point, AI is still virtually useless, yet it's still predicted to use 12% of America's energy in just a couple of years. Imagine where we'll be in 5 years. The rural people will be forced to move into their smart cities just to have access to water and power. This will make the transition very easy for most of the population, having no home or land with access to water or power, even if we can afford it. Starving us into submission has worked for them in the past. Just look at the Bolshevik Revolution, which is clearly their model to deal with us now and through the end of this little season. Look how easily they accomplished the death of 50 million Christians. But they have laid so much more groundwork for their current mission, and it will be multitudes worse. It's not difficult to wipe out an entire group when they're all packed into tiny cities like sardines. It's just common sense. We know they want to control us with AI, or if the technology never gets there, the lie of the idea of AI running government. It really gets them off the hook for mass genocide in their eyes. But look, they flat out admit it, and between the technology itself powering robotic surveillance and computers to control our every move, the biometric and social media surveillance, CBDCs, the fact that they openly discuss AI governance, buying up all resources to keep them out of the reach of the working class, and absolutely no effort being made to increase our basic national infrastructure, there is really no other logical conclusion to arrive at other than totalitarianism. Well, a market crash would certainly help, at least if it was legitimate. Deliberately crashing stock prices like they did in 1929 to steal people's assets at bargain prices didn't work out so well for the rest of us. But if legitimate, it would at least give Gen Z and the millennials a fighting chance at avoiding this inevitable demise. But I'm way too cynical for that. We're just too close to the end. So what can we do to prevent this? First and foremost, put your faith in Christ. It will make this time much more difficult, but we have to stay true to our hearts. No matter how difficult, we cannot relent. We also need to avoid temptation, going forward more than ever. My 5th video on how to navigate the little season shows us just how difficult this time will be. But as long as we stay on the straight path, there is a glorious light at the end of the tunnel. We can't stop them unless we fight back as a group. But we won't. So even if some of us do it, it really won't matter. People as a rule won't make a single sacrifice in their earthly life to improve their spiritual or afterlife. I keep hearing people say that they're going to fight back. No, they won't. If that was the case, then they already would have done it. If people didn't fight back over income tax, literally going from not paying to paying 40% of their income to the Federal Reserve, back when it would have been easy to shut it down, then they certainly won't fight back now against a military force that we can't beat. They didn't fight back when the government took away our weapons. The Second Amendment clearly states that the people should be on par militarily with the government. It would have been easy 100 plus years ago when they started building advanced military weaponry to make sure we also had those rights. But no. In fact, there's been no legitimate effort to defend any of our rights guaranteed to us in our Bill of Rights. And now they're gone. Unfortunately, Revelation 20 isn't very specific about those of us who don't join Satan's army. It talks about the judgment of the dead, which does include everyone, but it doesn't say much about those of us who resisted. A depressing interpretation would be that those of us who choose not to fight against our Savior are part of the dead. And from all evidence we have, they will more than likely have the ability to seek us out and destroy us before assembling their massive army. Okay, didn't think this video could get any darker, so I'll probably just end it here. I know it sounds pessimistic, but it's just truth. It's the most logical conclusion based on Scripture and the evidence at hand. Please know that it ends well, though. Just place your heart and faith in Jesus Christ and try to make sure everyone else does too. God bless everyone.